The humid Manila air hung heavy over the modest cafe where Bobby Pacquiao sat across from veteran sports journalist Carlos Mendoza. For 3 decades, he had carried stories that the world had never heard, memories that had shaped not just his own life, but the trajectory of one of boxing's greatest legends. The weight of these untold truths had grown heavier with each passing year. Each championship belt his younger brother earned, each accolade that painted an incomplete picture of their shared past. The recorder between them seemed to pulse with anticipation, as Bobby's weathered hands trembled slightly around his coffee cup. At 52, he bore the marks of a life lived in the shadows of greatness, his face etched with lines that spoke of sacrifice, protection, and the burden of being the older brother to a global icon. The decision to finally speak had not come easily, but recent events in their family had made silence no longer an option. Carlos had been covering Manny Pacquiao's career for over 15 years, but he sensed that today's conversation would reveal layers of the champion's story that had remained buried beneath the glitz of championship fights and political campaigns. The journalist's instincts told him that Bobby's reluctance to speak all these years hadn't been about loyalty alone. There were deeper, more complex reasons that had kept this family's complete truth locked away. The bustling sounds of Quezon City traffic filtered through the cafe windows, creating a backdrop of urban chaos that seemed fitting for the revelation about to unfold. Bobby's eyes held a mixture of resolve and vulnerability as he finally lifted his gaze to meet the journalist's expectant stare. The moment had arrived to lift the veil on a childhood that had been far more complicated than the rags-to-riches narrative the world knew. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across their table, Bobby took a deep breath that seemed to draw from decades of suppressed emotions. The story he was about to tell would not just shed light on Manny's formative years, but would reveal the extraordinary sacrifice and protection that had shaped the champion long before he ever stepped into a boxing ring. The truth, as Bobby would soon reveal, was both more heartbreaking and more inspiring than anyone could have imagined. Bobby's voice grew steady as he began to paint a picture of their childhood in General Santos City, a place where poverty wasn't just a condition, but a daily battle for survival. The Pacquiao family lived in a cramped wooden house that leaked during the monsoon season, where 5 children shared 2 small rooms, and dreams seemed as distant as the stars above their corrugated metal roof. Their father, Rosalio, struggled with alcoholism and gambling, often disappearing for days while their mother, Dionisia, worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table. The morning routine in the Pacquiao household began before dawn, when Bobby would wake to help his mother prepare for her day as a market vendor while simultaneously getting his younger siblings ready for school. Manny, then known simply as Emmanuel, was just 7 years old, but already showed signs of the restless energy that would later serve him in the ring. Bobby, at 12, had already assumed the role of protector and provider, a responsibility that would define his relationship with his famous brother for decades to come. School was a luxury that the family could barely afford, and textbooks were shared among the children or borrowed from more fortunate neighbors. Bobby watched as his younger brother struggled with academics, not from lack of intelligence, but from the constant hunger and worry that plagued their household. The boy who would later become a world champion often fell asleep at his desk, exhausted from helping their mother with her vegetable stall after school hours. The streets of General Santos were unforgiving to children without proper supervision, and Bobby took it upon himself to shield Manny from the worst elements of their neighborhood. Gang recruitment was common, drugs flowed freely through certain areas, and children without strong family structures often disappeared into lives of crime or worse. Bobby's protective instincts kicked in early, and he made decisions that would alter both their destinies in ways that wouldn't become clear for many years. What the world never knew was that Bobby's own dreams of education and a different life were systematically sacrificed to ensure that Manny had opportunities. Every peso Bobby earned from odd jobs, every favor he called in, every connection he made was directed toward giving his younger brother chances that he himself would never have. This pattern of selfless sacrifice would become the hidden foundation upon which Manny's future success would be built. The most difficult memories for Bobby to recount involved the lengths he went to protect Manny from their father's increasingly erratic behavior. Rosalio's drinking had escalated to the point where his presence in the house meant tension, fear, and often violence. Bobby learned to read the warning signs, the particular way their father walked when he'd been gambling away their food money, the dangerous quiet that preceded explosive outbursts. The moments when it became necessary to physically place himself between his father and his younger siblings. One particularly devastating night etched itself permanently into Bobby's memory. A night when 8-year-old Manny had accidentally knocked over a bottle of beer while trying to serve their father dinner. The rage that followed was swift and brutal, and Bobby found himself making a split-second decision that would haunt him for years. Without thinking, he claimed responsibility for the accident, absorbing the beating that had been intended for his little brother while Manny watched in terrified silence from the corner of their small kitchen. The pattern repeated itself countless times over the following months, with Bobby developing an almost supernatural ability to anticipate and deflect their father's anger away from the younger children. He became a master of misdirection, taking blame for broken dishes, missing money, or any transgression that might provoke their father's wrath. The physical scars healed, but the emotional weight of constantly being the family's shock absorber began to take its toll on the young teenager. What made these sacrifices even more poignant was Bobby's growing awareness of Manny's natural athletic abilities. Even as a young child, his brother displayed coordination, speed, and an aggressive spirit that set him apart from other kids in their neighborhood. Bobby began to see glimpses of a potential future for Manny that transcended their current circumstances, and this vision only strengthened his resolve to protect and nurture whatever gifts his brother possessed. The breaking point came when Bobby discovered that their father had been considering sending Manny to work in a factory to help support the family's gambling debts. The idea of his brother's hands that Bobby instinctively knew were destined for something greater, being damaged by industrial machinery was unacceptable. That night, Bobby made a decision that would change both their lives forever, though neither of them would understand the full implications until many years later. Bobby's decision to leave school permanently at age 14 was presented to the family as a practical necessity, but the truth was far more calculated and heartbreaking. He had realized that the family's limited resources could only support one child's education and future development, and his choice of which brother would receive that investment was made with the wisdom of someone far beyond his years. The official story told to neighbors and relatives was that Bobby preferred working to studying, but the reality was a deliberate act of sacrifice that would remain hidden for 3 decades. Working multiple jobs became Bobby's new reality: morning shifts at a local fish market, afternoon hours helping with construction projects, and evening work cleaning offices in the city center. The money he earned was carefully distributed, with the majority going toward keeping Manny in school and funding his growing interest in boxing. Bobby never told anyone, not even their mother, that he was also setting aside small amounts to eventually pay for proper boxing training for his brother. The most painful aspect of this sacrifice was watching Manny's natural talents develop, while simultaneously witnessing his brother's complete unawareness of the cost being paid for his opportunities. At local amateur fights, Bobby would stand in the crowd, his heart swelling with pride as Manny dominated opponents, while his own hands, calloused from manual labor, would never know the feel of boxing gloves in serious competition. Bobby's social life disappeared entirely as he took on the role of Manny's unofficial manager, trainer, and financial supporter. Friends his own age moved on to high school, college, and relationships, while Bobby's world narrowed to work and his brother's career. He learned to navigate the complex world of amateur boxing politics, making connections with trainers and promoters who might help Manny advance, all while maintaining the fiction that he was simply the supportive older brother rather than the architect of his siblings' boxing career. The isolation was profound, but Bobby found purpose in watching Manny's confidence grow with each victory. His brother's natural charisma began to emerge as he found success in the ring, and Bobby could see glimpses of the global superstar that Manny would eventually become. These moments of foresight made the sacrifice feel worthwhile, even as Bobby's own dreams of education, career, and personal fulfillment slipped further into the past. As Manny's amateur boxing career began to gain momentum, Bobby's role evolved from protector to silent partner in building what would become a boxing dynasty. He spent countless hours researching training techniques, studying fight footage of successful boxers, and learning about nutrition and conditioning, all knowledge that he would quietly pass along to Manny without ever claiming credit for the preparation work involved. The depth of Bobby's behind-the-scenes contributions would have shocked even those closest to the family. The financial juggling required to support Manny's advancing career became increasingly complex as the stakes grew higher. Bobby took on additional night work, borrowed money from loan sharks at dangerous interest rates, and sold family possessions to fund travel to important fights and training camps. He developed relationships with local businessmen who might sponsor Manny's career, often putting his own reputation and safety on the line to secure these crucial partnerships. What made Bobby's contributions even more remarkable was his ability to remain invisible in the narrative of Manny's success. He coached his brother on how to present himself to media and promoters, taught him the importance of humility and respect, and instilled the work ethic that would later become Manny's trademark. Yet Bobby always ensured that credit for these qualities went to their mother, their trainers, or Manny's own natural character, never to the brother who had systematically shaped these attributes. The emotional cost of this invisibility was immense, particularly as Manny began to achieve regional recognition and media attention. Interviews would focus on the young boxer's humble origins and natural talent, with Bobby mentioned only in passing as the supportive older brother. The narrative that emerged portrayed Manny as a self-made champion who had overcome poverty through determination and raw ability, while the true architect of his early success remained a footnote in his own creation story. Bobby's most profound realization during this period was that his sacrifice had become so complete that even he sometimes forgot where Manny's natural abilities ended and his own contributions began. The line between supporting his brother and living vicariously through him had blurred beyond recognition, creating a dynamic that would define their relationship for the next 2 decades. The success they were building together was real, but the cost to Bobby's individual identity was a price that neither brother fully understood at the time. As Manny's professional career began to take shape, Bobby found himself navigating increasingly complex emotional territory. His brother's natural talent had always been evident, but the addition of proper training and Bobby's strategic guidance created a combination that started attracting attention from major promoters and international boxing organizations. The humble kid from General Santos was beginning to show flashes of the world-class fighter he would become, and Bobby felt both immense pride and a growing sense of his own obsolescence. The transition from local fighter to national prospect brought new challenges that Bobby had to address, while maintaining his invisible role in Manny's career. Media training became necessary, and Bobby spent hours coaching his brother on how to handle interviews, how to present their family's story in a way that would appeal to fans, and how to maintain the humble persona that was becoming Manny's trademark. The irony that Bobby was teaching Manny to tell a version of their story that minimized Bobby's own contributions was not lost on the older brother. Financial pressures intensified as Manny's career demanded higher-level training facilities, better equipment, and more extensive travel for fights and promotion. Bobby's network of odd jobs and side hustles expanded to include increasingly risky ventures, including some borderline illegal activities that he never disclosed to his family. The moral compromises he made during this period weighed heavily on his conscience, but his commitment to Manny's success overrode his personal comfort with these decisions. The most painful aspect of this period was watching Manny begin to internalize the public narrative of his success. His brother started to believe the media stories about his natural rise to prominence, sometimes seeming to forget the countless hours Bobby had invested in research, planning, and financial sacrifice. This wasn't malicious on Manny's part. The human tendency to remember our own efforts more clearly than others' contributions is natural, but it created a growing emotional distance between the brothers that Bobby struggled to address. Despite these challenges, Bobby found genuine joy in watching Manny's personality blossom as his confidence grew. The shy, hungry child from their youth was transforming into a charismatic young man who could command attention in any room. Bobby recognized that his years of protection and investment were paying dividends not just in boxing success, but in helping Manny develop into the kind of person who could handle fame and fortune with grace. This transformation made all the sacrifice feel worthwhile, even as it highlighted how different their paths had become. The moment when Manny won his first major international title marked both the culmination of Bobby's decade-long investment and the beginning of a new kind of isolation. Watching his brother celebrate on television from their family home in General Santos, Bobby felt a complex mixture of emotions that he couldn't fully process. The pride was overwhelming, but it was accompanied by a profound loneliness as he realized that his role in creating this success would likely never be publicly acknowledged or fully understood. Manny's increasing wealth and fame created practical changes in their family dynamic that Bobby hadn't anticipated. His brother's generosity toward their mother and siblings was genuine and appreciated, but Bobby found himself in the awkward position of being financially dependent on the success he had helped create, while receiving none of the credit for that creation. The power dynamic between the brothers had shifted dramatically, with Manny now in the position of provider and Bobby relegated to grateful recipient. The media attention surrounding Manny's success brought scrutiny to their entire family, and Bobby found himself having to carefully manage his public statements to protect the narrative that had been built around his brother's career. Reporters occasionally asked about Bobby's own life and choices, but he had become so skilled at deflecting attention toward Manny that he sometimes felt like he was disappearing even from his own story. The weight of maintaining this fiction became exhausting. Perhaps most challenging was Bobby's growing awareness that his sacrifice had been so complete that he had no clear identity separate from his role as Manny's brother. At 38 years old, he had no independent career, no significant relationships outside the family, and no clear path forward that didn't involve continuing to orbit around his brother's success. The realization that he had essentially erased himself in service of Manny's dreams created an existential crisis that he had no framework for addressing. The loneliness of success was compounded by Bobby's inability to share his complex feelings with anyone who would understand. His mother saw only her son's generosity and success. His other siblings benefited from Manny's financial support, and Manny himself seemed genuinely unaware of the full extent of Bobby's sacrifice. Bobby had become the keeper of a secret so profound that even he sometimes wondered whether his contributions had been as significant as he remembered, or whether time and resentment had distorted his memories of those crucial early years. The catalyst for Bobby's decision to finally tell his story came not from his own need for recognition, but from watching a documentary about Manny's career that completely erased Bobby's contributions from the historical record. The film portrayed their father as the primary influence on Manny's early development and suggested that their mother's support had been the crucial factor in his brother's success. Sitting alone in his modest apartment, Bobby realized that if he didn't speak now, the true story of Manny's rise would be lost forever. The process of reaching out to Carlos Mendoza had taken Bobby months of internal debate. He had no desire to diminish Manny's accomplishments or create controversy that might damage his brother's legacy. But he had come to understand that his silence was not just erasing his own contributions, it was creating a false narrative that failed to capture the true complexity of how champions are made. The real story, Bobby believed, was more inspiring than the simplified version the public had been told. As Bobby finished recounting 3 decades of hidden sacrifice, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The journalist across from him sat in stunned silence, clearly processing the implications of what he had just heard. This wasn't just a story about boxing or fame. It was a profound meditation on family, sacrifice, and the invisible foundations upon which all great achievements are built. The revelation that Manny's success had been built on Bobby's systematic sacrifice didn't diminish the champion's accomplishments, but it provided crucial context that transformed the meaning of those achievements. Every championship belt, every record-breaking fight purse, every moment of glory had been built on a foundation of love so pure and selfless that it challenged conventional understanding of what it means to support family. In the days following the interview, Bobby felt a mixture of relief and anxiety about his decision to break his silence. He knew that the story would shock Manny and potentially strain their relationship. But he had come to believe that truth, even painful truth, was ultimately more valuable than the comfortable fiction they had all been living. The boy he had protected and nurtured had become a man capable of handling complex truths, and Bobby hoped that understanding the full story would ultimately bring them closer together rather than drive them apart. As the sun set over Manila, Bobby walked home through the same streets where he had once worked multiple jobs to fund his brother's dreams. The city had changed dramatically over the past 30 years, but the weight of his secret was finally gone. Whatever consequences came from telling his story, Bobby knew he had given the world a more complete understanding of how extraordinary success is really achieved, not through individual brilliance alone, but through the invisible sacrifices of those who love us enough to disappear into our success.